Test, test, 1, 2, test, test, 1, 2. Test, test, 1, 2, test, test, 1, 2. Okay. So originally I was going to do... Whoops. Originally I was going to do Lost in the Wrong World, Chapter 3. But I couldn't find my notes. I've dug through a ton of files, and I'm probably going to have to hunt down the old memory card I used to use for backups to find it again. So instead, we're going with the next one in the queue, which is this one. Which is A Seed in the Void. Which, hold on, I'll put a link to the story as usual in the chat. I'm not using my water bottle today, I'm using a giant mug. Again, I turned that on. I got one of those novel I'm down to just 1 cup a day mugs, and it's a literal liter size mug. So I just got a liter of water with some flavor packets in a mug. Now, normally I use my water bottle for this. And it's got these little caffeine packets, not caffeine, it's got these little cartridges you can load into it. gives it flavor and some caffeine, helps me get through the day. But unfortunately, it got mold, and I'm trying to clean it. Keyword here is trying. But I'm trying to clean it. But it's gotta sit for several days, and I gotta do this, that, and the other. And if it don't work, it's not that big of a loss. I mean, it literally only... If you're gonna try and clean it, all you literally need is just one of those cleaning things they use for dentures and a bottle of vinegar. Which, compared to a $20 metal water bottle, that's pretty cheap. So yeah, I was trying to drink from my massive mug and realized I needed to move it. The next issue I needed to solve was a better way of communicating. Normally, the way Mother and other world trees would communicate with their non-world tree offspring would be through a root network. However, that was impossible. The sheer amount of distance that we needed to connect all my seedlings was impossible with our current resources, to say the least. Mother's memory had entire sections of languages, verbal and even physical methods of communication. But in the void, these were all but useless. My cord just caught something. Hold on. And primarily, they had been communicating by using bits of genetic memory, growing small bits of material large enough to contain the needed genetic memory of what wanted to be communicated and feeding it to one another. It worked, but it was costly. But while However, after reviewing several methods of how various creatures, plants, animals, and intelligent life forms communicated, two were chosen. Oh, I should mention I'm looking for a webcam. If I can find one for cheap, I might set up a Rusty cam. But yeah, if I can manage it, I'm gonna get a webcam, and there'll just be a little thing in the corner with Rusty sleeping, because she's always with me. Don't get me wrong, I love the dog, but it's a bit stifling. I have only very recently gotten my couch back because of she can't get past the stand where the TV is. It's on wheels, so I have to roll it back and forth to get through, and she can't get past it. So he's on the other side of my TV. I have a little barricade, and she's not happy about that. She's not whining or whimpering, but she's not pleased with it either, because she has to sleep in her little pillow instead of getting on my couch. Now, little pillow is a bit of exaggeration when it's bigger than the pit bull. The amber eyes weren't too particularly powerful, but they could detect light. And crystal based life forms was the newest thing she had been learning about. The few she had experimented with were costly to grow very small, and were extremely energy intensive to use. However, since the leaves could be used to gather that energy easy enough, with some modification, that wouldn't be a problem once properly implemented. As one had to convert biological energy into electrical energy, modified to gather the electricity over time from the ambient light of the sun, and then stored within the crystals themselves. Once fully implemented, it wouldn't be as energy intensive if they just grew the crystals. I had been studying to see what else the electrical energy could be used for, but I hadn't gotten that far. However, I had learned three interesting things when using silicon based life. One, they could store electricity, not a large amount. Crystal. Two, they could be used to give off light in various spectrums of color. By having each of my seedlings give off a light color at their choosing, it was much easier to track them from greater distance. With a designated color pattern being for an emergency, of course. Next came the communication method. Basic flashing codes was easy enough to explain and implement. While they couldn't be used for excessive communication, as putting that much information into genetic memory was taxing, to say the least. Taxing enough to understand and transmit. The amount of materials required to convey it was extremely inefficient. So, basic codes would have to do for this time being. Food, ice, danger, help, and a few other basic codes. While they hadn't lost any of the seedlings yet, they had come close more than a few times. The debris fields weren't the safest place to be. Even if it didn't look like it, everything out here was constantly moving and shifting. One moment you could be latched onto a large rock, eating away, and the next second, a piece of rock no bigger than a bead could hit hard enough to shatter a fully grown normal tree, let alone her fragile seedlings. And more worryingly, if they had managed to survive in this mess, new environment what's to say other things hadn't found a way to thrive here as well? That was what had her worried the most. Had me worried the most. Just because you didn't see the predator did not mean the predator did not exist. Everything in her mother's genetic memory told her this was true. And while she did not have, or more likely, I had not yet found any hints of her having discovered life in the void beyond, did not mean there was not life there. If I could survive, if my seedlings could survive, it was likely not as lifeless as it first appeared. The second and far more functional form of communication came when I finally got around to making a manipulator limb. The larger consuming roots and stomach-like system were well enough, but unlike my seedlings, who only had a desire to grow and fulfill their duties, I wished to know more, wished to discover what I could. And being able to interact and observe the world beyond consuming everything I came across was part of that. The first limb created was based off of a treant arm. Though I had to reconsume it and remake it multiple times to achieve what I wanted. The problem was treants are treants typically based their physical form off of the most powerful predator they come across. And while some would base themselves off of bears or other beasts, most took on humanoid forms. I had no good way to extend and contract the limb. While I could bend it and move it like a basic arm, if I wished to reach further away, I would have to waste a great amount of time and energy growing and lengthening the arm itself. This was too inefficient. While it would not be strong, I based the idea off of it like a tree limb. However, I gave it many connecting joints, allowing it to fold out and expand. Fully extended, it resembled a three-fingered arm, almost as long as my own body. However, retracted, mother's husk. However, retracted, it took up less space than one of my consuming roots. The limb wouldn't be powerful enough to pull entire large chunks of material towards me, but I had the consuming roots for that. My larger roots for that. Fix root name. And the smaller, more maneuverable manipulator could be used for more dexterous work. However, it did not take much to tweak this. And using mycelium as a go-between, I created a neural connection point. After asking my oldest seedling, which was getting quite large, but was still using its mouth and compartment storage system, it had improved its own roots to match my more complex ones, allowing it to grab smaller bits of material and shove it into its internal storage. Extremely quickly, instead of having to simply shove it down its opening hatch. And risk material floating out. It had also created a second hatch within the first, I hate when it does that. I can never tell if I can say anything without deleting something. After it had taken a hit from a random piece of debris and had been sent spinning while its hatch was open. Jettisoning the more majority of its cargo. Giant mug of juice. Technically it's water, but still good. The first hatch would open, allowing material in. When the first compartment began to fill, it would close the first hatch and open the second, dumping allowing its forward momentum to push the material into the larger storage compartment. Once it had finished growing the small patch of mycelium on its exterior, I extended my new limb, which had a similar patch of mycelium growing on it, to it. And for the first time, I heard my seedling's voice. It could not speak. It did not understand language in the same way I understood it. But I mostly understood language from Mother's own genetic memory. When I had created them, I gave them as much information as I thought they could use that I could also fit in them from the genetic memory. But with this new connection, I could transfer this information freely, though not instantly. The mycelium could convey information, but it could only do so quickly and its speed was primarily limited by how much surface area it had to work with. Also, after some mild experimentation, I learned that it did so more efficiently if it had electrical energy instead of biological energy. It used electrical energy instead of biological energy, while the biochemical exchange was far more familiar to me. The electrical exchange was far more efficient and far quicker. I spent almost a decade working with my oldest seedling, trying to figure out how the best way to communicate with my existing seedlings, how to give them a proper voice, enough thought to communicate and actually speak. The list went on. Back. They were still somewhat stunted. But eventually, I made it work. Using the traditional communication method of giving small amounts of genetic data-related material, I one by one, I taught them to grow small mycelium patches. Some I even showed how to make more simplistic versions of my own limbs so they could communicate with one another without me to be its go-between. Before transferring over the needed information. It didn't take nearly as long once the process had begun than it did with my first seedling, as I wasn't learning as I went. Even It would not be long now before I would begin to create new batches of seeds to expand my reach even further. As I prepared to consume the large piece of debris I had originally come to this patch to consume, herefore, with the materials from it, I was hoping to finally be able to grow my form enough to fully cover what was left of Mother's husk, while I was still slowly working my way through it and its genetic memory. I could do so far faster if I could fully envelop it, instead of having to work roots over and around it. Once this was achieved, I could begin working on a more permanent form. While forms would never truly be permanent for me or my seedlings, we did adopt my seedlings tended to adopt forms that they'd more or less keep, improving and adapting. My first seedling adopted a more aquatic-looking form, using 2 side sail leaves, and a third central leaf for steering. Its front hatch resembling the mouth, though this is where the resemblance to sea life ended, as it had 3 ember eyes on its front, 2 on each rear, and 3 of my larger roots on its lower body. Another one of my otter seedlings had taken a form similar to an insectoid form, built purely for speed. It would fly around hunting for the most resource-rich materials to consume and condense down into a nutrient-rich sap that it would bake in the sun It wasn't quite amber like what I used for the eyes, but it was similar enough to draw the comparison. It would gather material, render it down, grow, a relatively spear-shaped object of the material before pushing against it to bring it up to a minimal speed that it would reach me and simply let go. Before returning to its effort. I had to keeping one root free to catch these. After the first one hit me. If they weren't so valuable, rich in nutrients and materials, I would have been extremely cross as it had managed to destroy one of my leaf sails. But I was able to process it back down, and with the added material, further my own growth. I just had to keep an amber eye out for it. Now, the others had varying shapes, forms, sizes, and designs. I did not limit them. So long as they continue to provide material to the cause. But soon, I'd have to decide on our next course of action. The debris field around the larger piece of debris was growing thin, and it would not be long before I would have to send them further out or move on. I did not like that option. I did not wish to send my seedlings far from me. There was a type of necromantic insect that would build its hives within the corpses of animals and use it until their home died, in which they would consume the corpse and move into a new one. While the hive and its various insects weren't that powerful, they were able to keep a solid necromancy spell going. While I found, like many life-oriented creatures, the idea of the undead horrible and disturbing, the idea of a moving home in which smaller, more nimble workers were constantly darting in and out from was useful. Once I completed my next development, maybe that was a path to go beyond. down. Not the corpses, but being some type of carrier for my seedlings. Well, I think that's it for tonight. Sorry it was a bit of a short stream, but I hope you enjoyed. As per always, this will be uploaded on my YouTube channel. And this story, the next few weeks, whenever I get around to finishing editing it, will be uploaded to my Patreon. We might do another editing stream next week. It really depends on my editor. She has the next copy of The Last Guardian, and I might be able to finish the next copy of Nights of the Fantasy before next week as well. But if she can finish helping me work on the next chapter of Last Guardian, we'll do the first prologue chapter next week. While the story itself is finished and is, when she's done with this chapter, fully available on my Patreon, there will be at least one, maybe two epilogue chapters to wrap things up and set things in motion for book 2. With that said, this is Wrecker, signing off.